Now that you're familiar with the Bill of Rights, and again, the Bill of Rights being the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, today we're going to focus on some limits to the Bill of Rights. The first limitation that we're going to look at with the Bill of Rights is part of the First Amendment, freedom of speech. So, yes, you do have freedom of speech, but unless it is a clear and present danger to our society, you may not say whatever you want to. So, for example, you cannot yell fire in a theater. That would be considered illegal because you are putting people in danger by causing a panic. The court case that's attached to the slide is Schenck versus the U.S., and this was during World War One, and you had people handing out pamphlets claiming that the draft that was going on, the draft that our country had in place, violated the 13th Amendment, which talks about involuntary servitude. So they were handing out pamphlets, basically saying, don't get drafted, try to dodge a draft if you can, don't sign up for it. And they then got in trouble for that and were charged with that as a crime kind of against our country. And this actually went to the Supreme Court, this case did, and the Supreme Court decided that the war draft does not violate the 13th Amendment of involuntary servitude. And that because when we're at war, there is a danger to our country and we do need a military. The other terms on here I want you to pay attention to are slander. That would be intentionally trying to harm a person's reputation. You are not allowed to do that. So that would be a limitation. And then also symbolic speech. Just the important thing to know that symbolic speech can also be protected, and symbolic speech can be just as powerful as words. So you might think of things like a swastika or maybe a Confederate flag as well. Those are protected under the First Amendment because speech means a variety of things, not just verbalizing something. Hopefully you were able to complete your Supreme Court cases assignment that you had looking at landmark cases, and one of them happens to be the Tinker case. And this goes right along with the idea of symbolic speech and how symbolic speech can be protected. Of course, you have these students wearing black armbands as a sign of protest. That was their idea of symbolic speech, and using their free speech in schools. And so they wore these black arms to protest, and they were then suspended for that from their school. And what was decided is that students are entitled to wear these. They can wear them as long as they are not a disruption to the learning environment. We've put the slide on the PowerPoint just to talk about, maybe a controversial topic of burning the flag. And in Texas versus Johnson, the question really is, are you allowed to burn the American flag, right? This really is the ultimate test of symbolic speech. The findings is that, yes, you do have the legal right to burn the flag. It is not illegal. It is perfectly legal to burn the flag as a type of freedom of speech or symbolic speech. Now, is it recommended necessarily? Of course, those are all, your own personal beliefs, but it is not illegal to burn the flag. There are other parts of the First Amendment where there are limitations. We talked about, freedom of speech, including symbolic speech. And one thing I want you to remember with that is that, yes, you do have the freedom of speech. There are limitations, but something that's important to also think about is that you have to live with the consequences of using your freedom of speech and what you say, whether it's verbally or using symbols, that it does have an impact and it does have consequences potentially. We're going to move on here and look at the limitations on freedom of the press. So you'll see the word libel, and you'll notice it looks very similar to slander, the idea of intentionally harming a person's reputation. Slander, someone verbalizing. Libel means that it is in print. So you'll oftentimes see maybe celebrities suing newspapers, right, or magazines for maybe putting things in there that make that celebrity not look so great potentially, and they will claim that they're being liable or intentionally trying to harm their reputation. Also, freedom of the press when it deals with national security. So, someone in the press cannot be divulging national security secrets. Obviously, that's limited and that's not going to be protected by the First Amendment. And then the last one on there with obscenity or pornography. While the government has had struggles, it's a little bit difficult to stop the printing of some of these things. What they have found is that they've been more successful in limiting sales of these things that maybe seem obscene or pornographic. The tough thing as well is that it's really up to an individual's perception what might be obscene or what might not be obscene. So it's a very vague definition. So this one's going to be a little bit tricky, but they are able to stop sometimes the sale, at least, of some of these things. The next limit that we're going to look at is the limit with freedom of assembly. So obviously it is important. We know that it is in the First Amendment, right, in the Bill of Rights, but there are some limitations to it. Number one, it has to be peaceful. So assembly has to be peaceful. If it is not, you can be charged and prosecuted for, any crimes that are committed during assembly. So it does have to be peaceful. Something important though to understand as well is that hate speech is actually protected as long as there is no violence. All right, so when you're looking at freedom of speech and freedom to assemble, again, hate speech is protected as long as there's no violence. So again, you cannot break the law. Of course, there's also no trespassing. In some recent marches that we've seen, there have been blocking of freeways. Again, that is not allowed by law. So if you are going to assemble, which you do have the right and the freedom to that, it has to be peaceful. There's no trespassing. And if you break the law while you're doing it, you can be charged and prosecuted for that crime. One prime example of hate speech being protected, as long as there, of course, is no violence, was the Skokie case. So you, again, hopefully look this up with the landmark cases from the Supreme Court. But the idea of the Skokie case is equal protection of the law. So there was a group of people that believed in the ideals and morals of the Nazi Party. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to hold a parade through a very majority Jewish neighborhood, basically. They wanted to do that. And in Skokie, what they were given their parade permit, but they were told that they had to buy insurance to protect whatever could happen because something might happen during the parade. Well, what happens is that they were the only group that was forced to obtain any kind of insurance for parade. No other group that had ever marched in this parade was required to buy insurance. And so that does make it all the way to the Supreme Court. And under the equal protection of the law, that was deemed then that was illegal, that and unconstitutional, that they should not have to purchase that insurance if others did not have to. So either everyone has to get the insurance or no one has to get it. In terms of freedom of religion, there are some limits to it. With the free exercise clause, the establishment clause, basically the idea is saying that the government cannot establish any one religion or interfere with your free exercise of religion. But however, if we're looking at some limitations of this, the pictures that are on there were from a veterans memorial where someone wanted to place a statue with a cross on it. And then you had some people who maybe did not believe in Christianity. They wanted to place a different monument there. And so those things can be taken up in local courts. But for example, you cannot have the 10 Commandments or a nativity scene on government property. If we look at the Second Amendment, it too does have limits. So, of course, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. And this is a pretty controversial amendment in our country, just in terms of what the interpretation of the amendment should be. So, some limits, though, that are placed on Second Amendment are waiting periods in order to purchase firearms, permits that you have to carry, or license you must hold. There was a ban on assault weapons from 1993 to 2004. That then it's called sunsetted, the idea where the president who was in office in '04 just let that expire, that ban expire, did not renew it. But at one point there was a ban on assault weapons and of course age as well. So yes, while you do have the right to bear arms, there are some limitations on it. In terms of other limits to the Bill of Rights, you have, obviously the idea of freedom from search and seizure, right, which is the Fourth Amendment, but at least search and seizure without a warrant. But there are limits that, for example, at an airport, they can search through your bags without a warrant, right, because they feel like it has to do with safety and national security. And so they can search stuff without a warrant. You have rights to privacy. People wonder, well, there are cameras on virtually every street corner now. Is that a violation of your privacy? Maybe too much big brother happening to the government watching you. Yeah, with the growing technology and how technology continues to change, that's going to challenge the questions of the rights to privacy. Other limits you can see as well, speedy in public trial. Well, what does speedy mean? Typically the fastest a court case can happen is 3 months. Well, that might not seem very speedy if you're sitting in jail waiting for your trial. And then, of course, the idea of a public trial as well. It's really up to a judge. In some cases, TV cameras are allowed in courtrooms, and other times they're not. That's up to the judge's discretion. But that's kind of looking at that idea of a public trial. If you're not allowing cameras, does that mean it's not public then? And then the last limit that you're going to look at is the idea of cruel and unusual punishment, and in particular, the death penalty. Some states do still have the death penalty. The question is the death penalty cruel and unusual? The United States is the only industrialized country who actually has the death penalty. So there are, questions about that as well.